You're listening to the AmWritingFantasy Podcast. In today's publishing landscape, you can reach fans all over the world. Query letters are a thing of the past. You don't even need a literary agent. There is nothing standing in the way of making a living from writing. Join two best-selling authors who have self-published more than 20 books between them. Now, on to the show with your hosts, Autumn Burt and Jesper Schmidt.
Hello, I am Jesper.
And I'm Autumn.
This is episode 35 of the AmWritingFantasy Podcast. And today we're going to talk a bit about how difficult it is to write every day. And sometimes things are just getting in the way and it can be difficult to continue to write every single day. And we're probably also going to touch on what you can do to overcome it. I'm not sure we have all the answers, but I think we can probably give you some ideas on it. But I guess we need to start to say sort of welcome to the new AmWritingFantasy. Are we not supposed to say that maybe?
I feel like it's new. This is our first real, dedicated podcast. So yay! We've got some learning to do about how we're doing this. It's a whole new setup, a whole new recording system. I'm currently on the road, so I'm sitting outside next to a library in Canada in Port Colborne. So if anyone is from the area listening, hey, I love your town. It's really awesome. I love your library, but I'm sitting outside because I don't want to disturb the other library listeners. So if you hear a little bit of traffic and cicadas on this beautiful August day, that's because, hey, we're just kind of winging this and learning. And they always say, never wait until the situation is optimal. They say this about writing all the time too. You can't wait for everything to be perfect because nothing will ever be perfect and then you'll just keep waiting. So we're doing this and I'm really excited about it actually.
Yeah, we sort of have a game plan here for how we want to structure these podcast episodes, but I sort of feel like until we get the hang of it, we run the risk of getting lost in our own new format here, but we'll see how it goes today.
So everyone bear with us. These will only get better, but hopefully you're as excited as we are to be really launching our podcast and moving away from YouTube is now our secondary channel, but we're still going to have something up there for the people, our dedicated fans who are still on YouTube.
Yeah. I mean, everybody can listen to the AmWritingFantasy stuff anywhere, almost.
That's right. We want to make sure you
no
are
difference
writing.
If you...
Yes.
Yeah, if you prefer podcast or if you prefer YouTube, well, it's all good. The only difference is that you can't see us anymore, so we can sort of sit in our pajamas here like we talked about last week, and you will have no idea, will you?
No, but since I'm sitting outside, I am not in pajamas today, so maybe next time.
Oh, thank God. I was just thinking if we hear like a police car or something, then we know why.
Yeah, if I disappear very suddenly, just don't ask. But post bail, no.
No, exactly. Yeah, and we also tucked in some a bit of music there in the beginning, as you can hear, and throughout the podcast we have a few other sort of music pieces that we're going to use, and by the end of the episode there's also some music. So I will be curious to know what the listeners thinks of the branding music. I mean, you and I, Autumn, have been debating a bit about the branding music when we got it recorded. As you can hear, we paid somebody other than ourselves to do the recording of that music, and of course he's a ton better than we are at that stuff. But yet, I mean, we sort of tried to find a way. What did we want him to say, and what music should there be in the background and whatnot. But I don't know. I mean, maybe we just have to ask people what they think.
Yeah, let us know. That'd be really great. We love feedback, so that's important to us. And we're all adapting, so take that with a grain of salt. But what do you think about our new intro and our new music? We'd love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, maybe at some point we could get something else recorded if we wanted, but at least for now we'll stick with this stuff. But that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear what you think of it, and maybe we'll change it. At least it's funny because when we were doing YouTube, we were always told also by the YouTube consultant that, but you do not take music more than 15 seconds because people hate it. but I think on a podcast, I think it's different. So here, hopefully, we can have a bit more music. I like music.
Like I said, when we were, you and I were debating switching from YouTube to podcast, I think podcast is going to fit us better. I'm not very good at, jumping up there and showing everything and being on video, where I like to get in depth. And I think readers like to get in depth. We're a little bit of a slower crowd. And I think listening is something we're much more attuned to. Just like that's why audiobooks are so popular. This is like the audio version instead of the movie adaptation, and I don't want to do the movie adaptation. I've never wanted to be an actor or an actress. So I think this will fit us very well, and I hope it fits our listeners. And like I said, let us know what you think if this is something that's working for you.
Yeah. And basically what we also wanted to do is start these podcasts by sharing a bit of a personal story, what is happening in our life and so forth, rather than just getting into the topic and then that's it. Because I think, at least when I listen to podcasts, I like to hear sort of what's going on in the host's personal life and whatnot. So we're gonna do that a bit in the beginning of each episode here, and then of course, if some of you listeners, if you don't like to listen to that, then you just sort of skip 10 minutes into each episode, and then you'll get into the topic or something like that. Maybe 15 minutes. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I'm lost here.
I think we're doing great. But yeah, so I think we still have a little bit of time, and I'll share something I've already mentioned. I'm on the road, so my husband and I have set out on a little 2-month adventure through the United States. It's coming to an end. And we've been actually traveling for 4 years on the road. We've done almost 100,000 miles across the U.S. and Canada.
Oh my God.
I know, and I've loved it. Oh my gosh, the things we've seen. It's been so inspiring, and I could tell stories for years and years and years about what we've done and seen. And I'm hardly done, but I also think we're coming to a new transition period, and I'm excited because, believe it or not, traveling every day was actually getting, in some ways, frustrating. So we are secretly looking at a small community in somewhere I never thought I'd want to move, but I'm super excited. So I'm hoping I'll have big news to share in maybe a few weeks, maybe a couple months, about a new location and some new things I'll be digging into.
And stable internet.
Oh my gosh, that'd be so exciting for this. I'm trying to imagine having a door I can close, because the listeners can't see what my camper looks like, what we traveled in. But it's not a solid vehicle. It's not a solid camper. It has a canvas top to it as well. So it's not soundproof either, but it is my home. And you and I have recorded videos, and we've done so much stuff and put up with some poor sound quality. But can you imagine both of us with having like doors that we can close and telling our significant others and spouses?
Yeah, that'll be awesome, right?
Be quiet! This is my time! So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Indeed, yeah. And I have to say, you've been really good at posting pictures, Autumn. I like when I see your traveling pictures on Facebook. There's some truly amazing nature. I mean, of course, bear in mind that I'm from Denmark. This country is just flat. There's nothing except fields and flatness here. So when you're posting all your mountain pictures or whatever, that's just awesome for me.
I'll make sure I go back and share some more. I have enough pictures to last for years, and where we're thinking of going to doesn't have many mountain pictures, but the area is gorgeous, and I can't wait to take those pictures too.
Ah, cool. And you know what? Because I'm not traveling, so I'm usually at home and I have stable internet, and I then am able to watch stuff like Netflix and whatnot. Have you ever watched the Danish series called The Rain, Autumn?
Yes, actually I have. I've watched, 2 or 3 seasons now? I've watched all of them.
I think there's 2 seasons, yeah. They released the second season recently. But that's pretty cool because that you actually watched it, because I wanted to talk a bit about that, because I'm really, really like, I cannot make up my mind what I'm thinking, because the first season was okay, and then recently they uploaded the second season, and then I've been watching the second season as well. And it's like, so you have these moments in the story where actually it's pretty good. You know, they build tension really nicely, and you don't know what's going to happen, and it's like, okay, this is cool. And then they put the most amateurish, insane bad dialogue in the middle of everything. All of a sudden, you know, the characters are just saying the stupidest stuff. And I get completely pulled out of the story. And it's like, what the hell? I mean, how can you simultaneously build a very, very good and interesting story and then have characters that are just saying the stupidest stuff? I mean, I don't get it.
I agree. Especially there was a few parts like the rain, obviously the name, it's very important. And especially the first series, it's an amazingly frightening event when it rains. The second series, watch how many times it rains and no one freaks out. And I'm wondering, did something change? Did I miss something huge? But there are times, too, that characters disappear and no one's looking for them. And these are supposed to be like a tough band of friends. And there were definitely times I'm like, this is great. And so many other times I'm like, oh, can we just fast forward through this, please?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say though, when it comes to this second season here, the way that they build over, if you look at this sort of, if you see this season as a character arc for Rasmus, you know, the guy who has this curse in him or this virus in him. If you look at the character arc, I really think that one thing they do incredibly well with that second season is to build a supervillain.
Yes.
You know, if you're looking at it as that, I mean, you by the end of the season, the last episode, I'm not going to spoil anything, but you are basically giving that guy every single reason why he is going to take out revenge on everything, and there is a solid reason for it, and I think that is extremely well done.
And I think the developing relationship of his sister, and now I can't remember her sort of boyfriend, sort of not boyfriend's name, is also very good. And some other quirks with Osmos too, with he gets a love interest, and how that pans out is just, yeah, I definitely, even when I write, I like to throw in a little bit of romance. I think it's important. It kind of gets everyone warm and fuzzy. And talk about building tension. You just yank the romance strings out from under somebody and collapses worlds over that. So I really do enjoy, there are some major parts of it that they do a fantastic job developing, and it's worth watching. I don't regret watching it. It's not the best one out there. I might share with you, there's one I'm watching that I can't wait to ask if you've seen, because it's one of those shows where I've given up trying to figure out what's going to happen, and I'm just trusting the writers. They will do what I don't expect them to do, and it'll be fantastic. And it's amazing when you find a show or a book or anything that you just finally give up trying to figure out and say, yes, entertain me.
Indeed.
A week on the internet with the AmWritingFantasy Podcast.
All right. You know, one thing we talked about as well, Autumn, and I'm not sure if we ever sort of concluded on it, but maybe we can outsource this to the audience or listeners here. Actually, that's probably a good idea. But I'm not sure if we ever figured out if it was possible to leave comments on the Google Podcast app or the native Apple Podcast app. I know we figured out that if you go to the Podbean site on AmWritingFantasy, then people can leave comments, but I'm not sure if we figured the other stuff out.
I have not managed to as of yet, so I'm not sure. So if any listeners know how we can get the comments section live on Apple and Google, how we can get access to those other than logging in, I guess, and checking them ourselves, that would be great. We'd love some pointers if some people are really like good at commenting and love leaving feedback and just know how the whole thing works.
Yeah, the easiest thing is actually just to see if you're able to leave a comment on the Google Podcast app or your Apple Podcast app and see what happens. I have no idea if we're gonna receive an email notification that there was a comment, but but try it out and we'll see what happens. Actually, because it would be cool for us to just hear what you think of this first episode in the new format.
Yes, encouragement is welcome.
Always. But I also wanted to mention that it was really funny because we posted on Patreon about these changes that we were going to make. Obviously, we for the Patreon members, we post or they have early access to the episode. So we posted it a couple of days in advance, and then on Patreon, Moosebeard went in and he actually wrote a whole story around how the AmWritingFantasy podcast had changed from YouTube to a podcast, and he was sort of making a story around the Palatine from Lord of the Rings, that sort of sphere that they look through and they can see far off lands and all that stuff. And he was like, "Oh no, we cannot see in the Palatine anymore," and whatnot. It was really funny. So I just wanted to thank Moosebeard for that story he posted. That was so funny.
It's always good to get a chuckle. I love. That's why I've always enjoyed working with writers. Even Twitter, when it was 140 characters, the snippets, the snarky cleverness of writers just always makes me smile, and it's fantastic. So, but I was going to mention that, we're still figuring out, we love comments. We get them from Patreon. We're hoping to figure out how to get them through the podcast. We have had a few. Thank you, Irish, for going in and showing us that, hey, comments do work on the Podbean site at the very least. But we do also have the AmWriting Fantasy group, and I was looking through the comments in there, and I thought it was really interesting that someone had recently posted that character names should never start with the same letter. I don't know if you saw that one in our private Facebook group, Jesper, but I thought that was interesting because I've heard, try not to have the same name, but the same first letter. Like, oh yeah, I've broken that quite a lot. It was interesting seeing the follow-up comments of what other people thought on that one. And I don't know about you. I mean, have you tried to avoid even the same first letter, or do you just try to make sure that they sound or look incredibly different?
It's so funny because at some point I was talking. I think it was in a YouTube video, to be honest, but I cannot remember where it was. But at some point I was basically giving the same advice, saying, you shouldn't, or maybe it's in the plotting book, actually. I can't remember anymore. But anyway, there was some place where I was giving the advice that you should really avoid that. And then the funny thing is that in my own Keystone Bone trilogy, the two main characters have the same first letter for their names, so it's so stupid. So it's one of those things, do as I say, don't do as I do.
Yeah, I guess so. Like I said, I've always heard, try to keep it away, try to keep them looking different. I have read a book that was historical fiction, and I think 3 characters had very almost identical, if you said them, they were identical names. But again, it was historical, and that's true to the history at the time, and they tried to separate them by doing different spellings. But while I'm writing fantasy, I think the worst I can say, though, is that I didn't realize this until I was doing the audiobook that I had a character Darag, and I also had one Dahal, and I realized, oh my gosh, that is like 2 letters different, and I make sure I don't do that again. But no one's ever commented on it. No one's ever gotten them confused. So I don't know, and I still... They both started with the...
You're good to go, then.
I mean, look at George R.R. Martin. Can you imagine if he had no characters with the same first... He had 150 named characters, I believe, in the first set of books. So
crazy.
How could you... There's only how many letters in the alphabet. So you gotta have to start repeating yourself at some point.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I guess so. I think the other thing I should just mention here before we transition into the actual content of today's episode was just that if you're listening to this episode when it releases on the 26th of August, then actually the next live Q&A session is on the 2nd of September, which means that if you head on over to Patreon, you can find the link in the episode show notes here. But if you head over to Patreon, and if you join on the Adult Dragon tier, that's the $5 one, we have actually just changed the reward system so that you will be able to join us on the 2nd of September for a live Q&A session. So if you're interested, head over to Patreon, check out how we set up all the rewards. There's a ton of rewards for that you're going to get your hands on for basically as little as $1 a month. But if you want to access to the Q&A session, then that's the $5 tier. But head over and check.
Come join us.
And on to today's topic.
So, writing every day, Autumn.
I
I
swear by that. I teach it, and I've sort of changed my mind.
Oh my, now I'm interested. What do you mean?
Well, I do think it's incredibly important, but I also think doing something every single day, yes, it's important to have the habit, but it's also important to build in time off. Why do we have vacations from work? Why do we, even do different things like date nights with our spouses to kind of shake things up? And I think every once in a while, we even have to give ourselves a break because, usually you tell someone, write every day. And if you don't, you should feel bad. You're a bad writer. You did not write today. And I actually, you know this, I just reached a stress point earlier this month that really came out of nowhere. I think it'd been building for a while, but it really hit me hard, surprisingly. And I don't break. I'm the rock in my relationship in my life. I know nothing usually shakes me, but I had an earthquake. So it does happen, and I needed some time off, and I stopped feeling guilty and said, I think it's been 2 weeks now. I've written maybe 2 days. And if it comes, I'm like, that's fantastic. But I'm not pushing myself because I needed a break. I felt like the well had not only run dry, like the gas tank had run dry. I was sucking up the sludge in the bottom, and it was crap, and I knew it was crap, and I wasn't loving any second of it. And that's not why I write. And yeah, I think I'm a writer. It is important to keep writing. It is a business to me as much as a job. And you do show up every day, but that's not true. You get vacations at work. You get sick days. You do get time off. And having taken a break, I'm excited about things again. I'm excited about the story again. I think I didn't realize how low I'd gotten, but I needed it. And now I'm thinking, you know what? Why don't you get weekends off from your job? Why do we tell writers to write every single day without even saying, take a break once a month? Give yourself a day off.
Yeah. I follow your line of thinking here, but I'm also, I'm going to challenge you a bit as well.
That's good. That's why we're a partnership.
The way this is difficult because it's like walking a very, very fine balance, because I fully agree that it's very easy for writing and the author's business side of your life to basically take over, and that is certainly not healthy. So I'm fully in agreement with you that, you shouldn't let everything take over and basically, grind yourself to the ground by stress and having to write. And you probably, if you follow a bit along on the internet, the listener here, then you've probably seen all the Facebook groups and whatnot where it's sort of become, popular to say that you should be publishing books every month. And if you don't publish book every month, then the Amazon gods don't like you and it's going to be shit, And I don't prescribe to that. I don't think that's true. And I think that's only going to drive you to stress, basically, right? So that's certainly not healthy. And then saying all that, then at the same time, we are writers, so we do need to write. But then if I'm looking at myself, for example, then because we are also running this AmWritingFantasy business and we are basically running courses and we are currently recording a course for world building as well. So, if I'm looking at myself, I have not written anything since I finished the first draft of our plotting book. which is probably like, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, maybe more. I'm not sure, but it's a long time ago. And I've not written any fiction words ever since, or non-fiction words in that case. But I've not written anything other than I've been writing scripts for the course and recording course modules and whatnot. But if I had to do both, I would probably get pretty stressed out. So I just sort of said, okay, I'm going to be done with the courses first. And then afterwards, I'm going... then Autumn is reviewing or editing our plotting book. And then at some point that's done and we'll get into our fiction writing again. But why I'm struggling with this basically, Autumn, is because I cannot either advocate that you sort of come up with excuses for yourself to not write, meaning that, oh, okay, I need to do the course, so now I can't do anything else, or I need to do Facebook ads, so now I can't do anything else, because it also happens that people come up with excuses for themselves not to write, right? So I don't know. I'm really struggling with this one.
I have to admit, because I was going to say that it kind of also depends on what you define as writing. Are we just going to talk about fiction? Because I have been writing. I've been writing on the Patreon posts. I've got other things that I've been working on. But I think I'm definitely talking about more like the book, a story. And... because sometimes I switch.
That's also what I talked about.
Exactly. So but again, I do think we often don't credit authors to consider that writing is writing. Sometimes it's journaling. Sometimes you're writing sales copy, book blurbs. All those things do also count to writing, but there's something different. So another pressure with working on a story development and getting it going and developing and creating that. And so I have to admit, there is that part of me that says, is it, are you making an excuse? Have you not written for a very long time? Or in general, are you writing every single day? You're usually really, really good at it. And some days you just need a day to go maybe read a book or take a walk to the beach. Just go do something else that doesn't involve, picking up your story and developing it, or maybe just, taking a day off and maybe just thinking about it and seeing what comes out of that instead of working it.
It's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, it's really tough.
It is.
I mean, because it's also like, if you're going to make a living from writing, you have to write. It's not like, if I go into a day job, it's not like I can go to the boss and say, today I'm just not feeling it. I think I'm like, I have worker's block today, so maybe I'm going to go to the beach. It doesn't work like that.
You don't have
and if you're right,
days? Come on.
I'm not saying that it can never happen that you take a day off, and that's not what I'm saying. And that's fine, but I think there's also a bit of, not for everybody, but for some people, there's a bit of too much coming up with excuses for why I don't feel the story today, or I'm a bit tired today, I will write tomorrow. But if you want to make a living from writing, you have to write, right? I mean, am I wrong?
No, it's very true. I do not disagree with you. And I mean, by slowing down, taking a break, I've had to readjust my timelines and tell my readers that, hey, I know I said I wanted to finish this draft at the end of August, and I just needed, for some personal issues, I needed to push that back to the end of September because I just needed a break. Right. But at the same time, I do think that, it does come down to keeping things realistic, knowing if you do need a break. But again, I think you and I definitely, when we're writing, we have a tendency to make sure we're writing every single day, literally 7 days a week. I always keep a minimum word count, which is easy. I mean, it's 500 words. Even when I'm stressed, busy, I try to get up in the morning and write 500 words, which is like half an hour. If I can't put a half an hour aside to write, to at least keep things going, that's really kind of sad. But, I do know a few authors who write 5,000 words a day. She turns out a book literally, I think every month, a month and a half, 2 months max between the editing and everything else. And I'd once admire her and also think 5,000 words, that's all. There's so much more I want to do in a day other than just write that story. I have, a husband, I have a dog, I'm a graphic artist, I like talking to other authors. I don't think I want to spend 8 hours in a cafe writing 5,000 words, but I know
No, that's where I love the dictation, right? Because I think I can turn out like probably 4,000 words in 2 to 3 hours,
amazing.
right? And then I'm done. But of course, it's first draft material, right? You still need to do all the editing and whatnot afterward, and it's not pretty prose, but the story is there, and that's the main thing, You get the story out and get that recorded, then you can make it sound nice afterwards.
It's true. Of course, I try to do a fairly clean first draft, but everyone's got to do editing, and it's got to be decent. But I do think there's, like I said, I'm seeing a benefit for having taken a little bit of time off because I really hit the bottom of the barrel. But is every author going to hit that? I mean, I've been publishing since 2012, and this is my first break, I think. And I guess it's not even a true break because it's I have been doing other types of writing. I just haven't. I've only plucked, like I said, I've plucked away at my story. I think I've done 1,000 words in 2 weeks. That is so abysmal. But I feel ready to look at it again, and I know I'm ready to look at it again. So I know myself, I know my habits. And so maybe, I'm going to say if you've been writing for 7 years and you want to take a 2-week break, I'm going to say go ahead.
That's probably okay.
It's really fine to go ahead.
That's probably okay.
That's probably okay. But if you've only been writing 7 days and it's your first attempt ever in writing, maybe you should, work at that a little bit more. If you haven't ever finished a book, if you've never finished, if you're been working on a chapter for a month, it's time to finish that chapter and move on. So those are the important things. You do need to keep going. I've always said even just a sentence, at least keep it going, make the story feel alive, at least give yourself a little bonus saying, I sat down today. All that came out was one decent sentence, but you did it. That's important.
Yeah, and of course there's also we were just talking about thousands of words there, but I mean, if you just, write 250 words a day, a year from now you'll have a novel.
You'll get there. Right? And again, think about, that's why I teach how we teach what we do and having an outline. If you have your end goal in sight, like I'm writing a novella, I know how many chapters it's going to be, I know what chapter I'm on, I know what's going to happen next. So I know exactly where I am, and I think that really helps to knowing where your finish line is. The author I know who writes that 5,000 words a day, they already have it all figured out, the exact word count, and they're basically checking boxes off every single day saying, I did this, I did this, I did this. And it is truly a business and a work schedule and a milestones and everything else that they've basically got a business plan with every single book they write. I'm impressed and terrified of that at the same time, but it shows you how much you can put out, and she's making a living from her writing, and that's one reason it's so serious for her.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, there is a few different things that you can do to make sure that at least it becomes easier to stick to the writing part. I mean, we human beings are creatures of habit. So if you can link your writing and into a habit or make it become a habit. And what I mean by that is that, for example, I like to say either write first thing in the morning before there is any distractions that can derail you, or write late in the evening when, for example, everybody else in the house has gone to bed and you know that you cannot no longer be distracted by something, because then at least you will protect your writing time. And I think it's important to protect that writing time. And maybe it's also good to, I don't know, it probably, that this is not so important for me, but maybe it'll help some other people, and maybe, I don't know what you think about it, Autumn, but if you could train your body to sort of recognize some signals, that would probably be good. Like if I put on some certain music, then my body is trained to know, okay, this is because I'm going to write, or maybe I make myself a special cup of tea every evening before, and then I know, okay, now it's time to write. I think, I don't know, maybe that'll be helpful for some people.
I think it does. Those little writing rituals, I think, are actually really key. I think they could be Sometimes it could be a disadvantage because I had myself trained when I was working full time. I would come home, see my husband, I'd make a cup of tea, I'd sit down with my laptop, and do not talk to me for like an hour and 45 minutes.
Right.
This is my time. I'm writing a book. And then it would be like social time, make dinner.
Right.
But then if sometimes I'd have a Saturday and I suddenly had 3 hours and it wasn't the right time, my body and my mind were not like, oh, you want to write now? Right? Oh, okay.
Forget it. I'm not going to.
It would take longer to get into the story, but I would almost do I could have 3 hours instead of like 45 minutes. And I'd only get probably the same amount of work done. And it's like, well, darn. So you have to, it helps when you maybe don't make it time dependent, but maybe routine dependent. Music, sit down at your writing desk to make sure you turn off all your apps that could possibly ping you and tell you that someone just left a new comment on Instagram and you have to go see it. Don't just turn all that stuff off and start writing. And I do think that is very important. But it shouldn't be the only thing. If you're spontaneous, then just go for it.
Right. Yeah, I can't remember if I ever asked you before, but do you believe in writer's block, Autumn?
I don't. For me, the only time...
That was a tough one, huh?
You sprang this on me. I think... I do believe in writer's block in some ways. I've never had it where the story was completely dead to me, but I've hit walls that I've learned to realize are usually my subconscious saying something is missing. And every time when I stepped back and looked at everything, looked at the plot, tried to figure out what was going on, I would be like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I just missed this thread. Everything would have gone off the rails if I hadn't stopped here. And that's usually what it is for me. It's usually a sign my subconscious is seeing something that I consciously did not see. But I've never had a complete, like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting here staring at a blank page. I can't write a word. I don't know. You could give me a piece of lint and I'll put a character on it and I could probably write 5,000 words. It's not difficult.
It's not
it's not that I can't write, but maybe I don't want to write what I'm supposed to be writing, but I can always write.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe in writer's block in the sense that you can sort of run out of creativity, which I think is also what you're mentioning there. I mean, for me, writer's block is just it's a symptom that you don't know what's going to happen next. That's the problem, right? You've sort of gotten to a stage in the story where I'm a bit stuck here. I don't know what the characters are going to do next or what's going to happen next. And at least for me, I found that the outlining just helps tremendously to keep the writing going, because I always know what's going to happen next. I never get stuck.
I agree.
Then, of course, some people can start saying, well, if you outline it, and this is something I talked a bit about, or we talk a bit about in the plotting book, which, of course, we have not released yet. But
just trust us, it's there.
But we talk a bit it's there on a file. But we talk there a bit about how some people feel like, well, if you know what's going to happen, then there's no excitement in writing it I mean, I guess in one way or another, I can sort of follow the logic on that. But on the other hand, the fact that I know what's going to happen and I know exactly where it's going just means that it saves me so much time in editing plot holes and all that stuff, or rewriting whole sections afterwards, because there is no plot holes.
No, I agree. That's, I mean, I still find...
So, yeah, I don't know if that's how I view writer's block. I don't really believe that it's anything
I don't
other
think I do
than
it quite
it's
as
just
strong an outline as you do. But I definitely... And I still find,
you're breaking up a bit.
Oh, no, sorry. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Go ahead again.
Okay, yeah. Are you? Yeah, there we go. God, I love technology. We're zapping things around the world. So, but yeah, I think with plotting, I plot maybe not as thoroughly as you do, but I always know what's happening in the chapter, and I've got to set up the scenes maybe a little bit. And sometimes new threads develop, and like I said, no matter how much you plot, sometimes something new can come up and you realize you missed it. And that's usually when I realize that the story is not clicking for some reason, and I pause and I figure it out. And usually sometimes add in chapters, figure out what's missing to really develop it. But I would think even with outlining, I'm always excited to write what's coming next, because I can't wait to take what's a brief idea, outlined in a couple of sentences and turn it into a full-fledged scene with emotion and dialogue and characters moving. And there are always those lulls that you're like, okay, I want to get to the next really big tension-filled moment. So it takes, sometimes there's some spots where you're like, okay, I just want to push through this. But usually I'm just excited. If I'm not excited to write, is the reader going to be excited to read it?
No, that's true. But you want to, I think there's an important point in what you just said there, because this thing about getting excited, I think there's a flip side to this that we need to be mindful of and be careful with, because I fully agree that, of course, you should be excited about what's happening in your own story and that stuff. But at the same time, it's so easy to get blinded by a new idea, or, this happens so often, and this is probably why there's a million manuscripts in desk drawers around the world here. But, people get a third way through their manuscript or their novel, and then they feel like, well, I don't know, I don't quite feel the story anymore, and I have this other idea that is excellent. So let me pause this novel, and then I'll start writing that one instead. And then they get a third way through that one, and then the same thing happens again. And I think you have to stick to it. If you're going to make any sort of money from writing, you have to finish the novels. You can't just jump every time you get excited by something new, because it happens to all of it. It happens to me as well. Often, when I'm halfway through or a third way through or whatever, through a novel, then I start getting excited by the next book and what's going to happen there. But I can't just jump around all the time, right? I mean, it's never going to get done then. No,
it's very true. I mean, we both tend to write series. You can't even it's one thing with a book, but you're on book 1 or 2 of a series. You can't just say, no, I'm going to go do this other one instead. You make a choice, business choice, a professional choice, a promise to your readers that you're going to finish what you start. So you're going to have to finish what you start, even when you maybe want to go check out something new. And I have to admit, that's one reason, to wrap back to where we started, one reason I've taken a writer's break the last 2 weeks is that, there's a few other ideas and crazy scenes that I'm kind of tempted to just go, just do something fun and get myself going on those. And I'm kind of resisting that pull.
And then the wonderful thing happened here with technology that I think Autumn just lost her connection there.
And I'm kind of resisting that pull. I can see
she's coming back now.
To start something
slowly
new,
here. But yeah, this happens when you're on the move. And as we said in the beginning, hopefully Autumn will get into a stable place with stable internet in the near future. But it just dropped the connection, but it happens. So I don't know what good point she was about to make, but I guess what I could tell you is at least another little trick that some people talk about is that whether or not you should end the chapters or you should stop in the middle of a chapter. And because I'm sort of a checklist kind of guy, I really like to end chapters completely, because then I feel good about myself that I know that chapter is done, and then I can move on to the next day tomorrow. But there are also authors who swear by actually stopping middle of a sentence in the middle of a chapter, because then basically you jump straight into the flow the day after. So that's another little trick that you can apply if you find that helpful. So I guess the conclusion is that don't get derailed, and next Monday we'll cover how to handle bad reviews.
If you like what you just heard, there's a few things you can do to support the AmWritingFantasy Podcast. Please tell a fellow author about the show and visit us at Apple Podcast and leave a rating and review. You can also join Autumn and Jesper on patreon.com/AmWritingFantasy. For as little as $1 a month, you'll get awesome rewards and keep the AmWritingFantasy Podcast going. Stay safe out there and see you next Monday.